Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LEC Spring Split Week number 1 overview and analysis video. It's finally time to get into the LEC in the Spring Split here. I know this video is coming out a little bit later in the week than it normally will. I usually don't want to get these out on Friday, typically closer to Wednesday or Thursday, but as you guys know, with all of the primers, all of the other stuff going on in the LPL, like their little last chance qualifier stage, it was just difficult to get this one out earlier on in the week, but luckily we have finally reached the LEC day, so I appreciate you guys waiting on this video. But I'm super excited to finally talk about some LEC action in the Spring Split, especially with everything that happened at First Stand, with Corp really underperforming at the beginning of that tournament, and then, you know, I guess pseudo figuring things out, or I guess living up to expectations by the end and making the finals. You know, there's a lot to talk about in terms of expectations with the LEC, and I think a lot of these teams are very interesting, especially the ones that made big roster changes. So I'm excited for this video. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below what team impressed you the most this week, what team was the most underwhelming to you this week. Obviously, I'll give my opinions as we go throughout this, but always curious to know where you guys land down in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's get into the video. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. I will be updating my personal power rankings at the end of this video as well, so I can kind of talk about which teams I think are, you know, jumping up, which teams I feel better about after, you know, seeing them and maybe their new roster iterations now, and which teams I maybe feel worse about moving into the Spring Split. I'm excited to go over all of that, but most of today will be spent talking about the series that we got. As a reminder, the format that we have in Spring Split, it's the most regular, normal format of any league in the entire world, and boy am I happy to see something like this. It's single round robin, best of 3, hard fearless in the regular season to qualify 6 teams for a double elimination playoff. Yes, this is exactly what we've been looking for, a regular format with regular rules, not a lot of these convoluted formats. The LEC has never been all too bad about this. You know, best of 1s, I'm glad are gone. I'm glad that those aren't here anymore. I would prefer the best of 3s in general, and, you know, that's obviously why I'm excited for this, but all the other leagues in the world trying to reinvent the wheel, I'm really excited for this, like, generic regular season style format. So I'm excited to get into it. Let's go ahead and do it. Obviously, 3 series on day number 1, 2 on day 2, and 2 on day 3. So 7 in total to go over. Let's start with day number 1, and we kick it off with what I have always called the Brexit battle. I guess it's not necessarily that anymore, with another team kind of buying into the spot, but it was Fnatic taking on GIANTX here, and Fnatic is going to pick up the 2-0 win. No surprise in terms of outcome, and really no surprise in terms of how we got here. GX is a decent team, and I expected them to be fine heading into this split. I'm definitely a bit disappointed by how they performed on day number 1 here, but Fnatic absolutely should not have trouble with a team like GIANTX. Quite frankly, none of the top 4 teams should have trouble with anybody that's not another top 4 team. That's just how the LEC should be going right now, and so to see Fnatic kick off their, you know, regular season, their Spring Split with a 2-0 win, it's definitely encouraging, especially because Game 1 was so dominant, and Game 2 was fine. You know, they were patient and controlled. It wasn't a bad showing for Fnatic. I actually think they played this game really well, or played both of these games really well. For GIANTX, there are a lot of concerning traits for them that really keep them out of the upper echelon in terms of what the expectations are, but this team does have talent. I think some of that shined through in this first series. It just certainly wasn't enough to actually be able to compete with Fnatic. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me is pretty obviously going to go to Oscarinin. We'll talk about this on the other side as well, but there was a gigantic top gap in this series. The top lane differential was absolutely ginormous. People will continuously tell me that I'm low on Oscarinin by putting him as like I think I had him 4th in my top lane rankings going into this split, just behind Adam, and I know people think that that's crazy. Adam's a really good player. Oscarinin's a really good player, and quite frankly, he's playing the best league of his entire career at the current moment. He started off really well in 2025. It felt like winter was kind of a coming out party for him as an actual primary option, but the problem for Oscar has never been his good games, it's been his bad games, right? He's just not a particularly consistent player from a game-to-game basis. So far this year, it has been a lot better, and that's definitely what we saw here. The Ambessa in particular in game number 2 was incredible. He was super far ahead in terms of the 1v1, and don't even get me started on the Rumble versus Gwen matchup in game number 1, which he absolutely obliterated. I don't think the KDA is indicative of how good he was. He was better than the 6-4 and 13 scoreline that we're seeing on that side. He was definitely the stronger of these two top laners. Locke getting super far behind. Some of that you can put on Razork, but a lot of that you can put on Oscarinin, who played really well. Of course, you do want to give a lot of credit to the rest of this team. Razork was excellent. Isma obviously stepping in as the new jungler for GIANTX, with Closer stepping away from pro play. Razork, not the hardest matchup in the world for him, but definitely took advantage of it. Ends up getting a solo kill in game number 2 onto the Cassante as a Pantheon. That should basically never happen. Some of that is on Lot, but a lot of that is on Razork, who was super far ahead. Dude was the same level as both of his solo laners throughout most of game number 2 on the Pantheon. He just was super far ahead in terms of the jungle matchup, was crazy ahead in terms of resources, absolutely unreal. And this is what Razork does really well. This is why he's been like a regular season MVP candidate for so long, is that when he does generate gigantic leads, he is impossible to shut down. He is one of the best players at playing through a snowball situation in the entire world, quite frankly, like including, you know, LCK, LPL. When you give Razork a lead and advantage, he's so crazy good at being able to push and punish a lot of the mistakes that are being made on the other side of it. So credit to Razork. The issue for Razork has always been if he doesn't get that lead, he's not a particularly good player, but, you know, we save that conversation for the playoffs when that inevitably comes back up. Upset and Mickey continue, in my opinion, to be the best bot lane in Europe. I don't even think it's really all that debatable right now. People really question that in my video. I know I got a lot of hate for the Hansama thing. You know, we'll talk about that a bit more when we get to G2, but to me, it was very clear that Upset and Mickey were the best bot lane in the LEC, regardless of what happened in the playoffs, because playoffs were not their fault. I don't know how you can look at the playoffs and say that they were their fault. Noah and Jun obviously are the heart and soul and the driving force of GX. They are the reason that I'm excited about this team, but they're not the better of these two bot lanes. It's not a surprise to see them struggle here. Upset and Mickey continue to look good. Humanoid was also fine. There were times where he was definitely weaker than Jackie's. Humanoid continues to be a player that I'm just not buying in on. Like, he's the opposite of a channel darling on this channel. Everybody knows that at this point, but it is what it is, right? If Fnatic's going to be able to play through Razork's tempo early, and if Oscar especially is going to be able to carry games on the top side, that makes things a lot simpler for Fnatic. And then for GIANTX on the other side, top lane was a disaster. Nothing else to say. Lot got obliterated. He's going to get dead of the series. 2 of the worst games he's played. In fact, I would probably argue these are the 2 worst games that I've seen Lot play. It just has not looked good recently. He was so good when this team went 3-0 and when they started, I think, 5-1 across the first 2 weeks of the winter split. But then, you know, week 3 and playoffs, like, not good at all. He was getting absolutely blasted by players that are significantly worse than him, that have basically no reason to be beating him in the way that they are. Maybe not significantly worse than him, but like, he definitely came back down to earth. This was a guy who was kind of heralded as a really good weak side top laner coming into the league. That's why GX wanted to pick him up. He has not been a good weak side top laner in the past couple of weeks. And so let's hope that Lot can get back on track. For now, he's kind of on pace to be the worst top laner in the league, which is definitely disappointing. And that really does halt GX's upside. One of the reasons I was excited about this team is because I thought Lot could stabilize, but that is clearly not the case. Isma was not particularly good in this series. Mega out-jungled by Razork. Noah and Jun were not the better of these 2 bot lanes. Jun in particular, I think, needed to be a lot more aggressive. Again, they are the stars of this team. I know that they're built around Jackies, and that's what a lot of people are going to talk about them for, but Noah and Jun were the driving force for why this team was winning games in the winter split, and I think that should be the same in spring. They just weren't able to win in the 2v2, and Jackies was probably the best player on this team. Now, that is encouraging because he honestly wasn't all that good in winter. He really was like a bottom 4-ish mid laner in terms of production in the winter split. He's going to need to be an actual force if this team wants to be top 5, like I have them projected, and I kind of expected that to happen. But again, this is not a loss that was unexpected. They were going into a team that matches up really well into GX. In fact, I think this is probably the worst matchup for them in the entire league, because Noah and Jun just have such a hard time being able to win against a bot lane that's so consistent and can generate mid-game leads, and that's where GX ends up faltering. If Lot can't survive on the top side, that's going to be an issue, but not a shocking loss, and it is a good win for Fnatic. Again, dominating game 1, being really patient in game number 2, kind of stifling a comeback attempt from Jackie's on the Azir, but, you know, making sure that they don't throw away the game and still being able to generate resources. It's a good look for Fnatic, but the question has never been, are they good enough in the regular season? It's, are they good enough in the playoffs? And at least for now, this feels a lot more like regular season winter Fnatic than it does like playoffs winter Fnatic, and that's to be determined moving forward. Then moving on to our second series here of day number 1, and 2 teams that I think had a lot to prove to me coming into this split. It was Team Heretics taking on Rogue, and Heretics is going to pick up the 2-0 win, and quite frankly, Rogue just looks absolutely inept. Not that this should surprise anybody. This team has not been good all year long, but man, it really is just frustrating to watch them because they try and do stuff in game number 1, or I should say, Adam looks incredible on the top side in game number 1, completely pops off on the Aurora, 1v9s the entire game. game, and they still can't win because everybody else on the team is a complete NPC. And then in game 2, they just completely give up. Adam's not able to win early in the top lane matchup, and nobody else on this team can do anything. I got criticism for putting Adam top 3 in terms of my top lane rankings. What do you want me to do? This guy is unreal. This guy is absolutely deserving of a top spot in the LEC from a mechanical and from like an overall game perspective, and it just doesn't matter. He's in rogue jail because he's, you know, a little bit temperamental off the rift. It's a very, very unfortunate circumstance for him, but congratulations to Team Heretics for a victory. This feels like kind of your planned rogue win of the split. Hopefully they can carry this momentum over. I'll kind of talk about why I'm just not entirely changing my opinion because of this series. I don't think this actually tells us a lot about Heretics, but it's good that they won it. Player of the series can go to basically anybody. I don't think one player stood out a ton more than the rest. Broadcast gave it to Camelou. I kind of agree. I think the Cho'Gath obviously took a lot of headlines for a reason in the mid lane because it's not the most common pick in the world, but Camelou still was very relevant in that second game, and especially when they started, you know, snowballing things out of control. He was a really good team fighter in game 1 on the Hui as well. My issue with Camelou has, again, not been his good games. It's a very similar thing to what I said about Oscar Rinnan, except Camelou is obviously way worse than Oscar Rinnan, but Camelou had some awful, awful games over the course of winter. Like, when he lost, he loses hard, but when Camelou has an advantage, when he is going into the mid and late game with a gold lead, he's a really good player in that regard. I see what Team Heretics wanted to try and pull out of him. The issue for Camelou is obviously that if he loses in the early game, he is a non-factor. Like, he is the worst player in the LEC when he has to play from a gold deficit. Luckily, that didn't have to happen in these 2 games. He was in a decent spot in both, and he looked pretty solid. But if you wanted to give this player of the series to Carlson on the top side, I kind of can understand that. Adam was on his A game today, and Carlson was really good on the Jax in game number 2. Sheo was a fantastic facilitator throughout the entire series, was way better than Malrang on the other side. Not that that should surprise anybody. I was pretty high on Sheo coming into this split after what we saw in winter. I thought Stend was really good on the Rakan in game number 2. I honestly very narrowly gave player of the series to him down in the support position because I think you can make the case that he was the flashiest playmaker for Heretics across this series. The only player I didn't really consider was Flakked, mostly because he was just walking into Ash Arrows in game number 1, and that's not necessarily something I love to see, but it's not like he was bad. Like, he was still a positive for the team. I just think he was probably the least positive for the team in this particular series, but Team Heretics just looking good across the board, specifically their young players, the players we kind of needed to see step up, Camelou and Stend, you know, even Carlson on the top side. We need to see them start looking like LEC caliber players. That's always going to be the thing that holds them back. I trust Sheo a lot. I trust Flakked to be able to, you know, make things happen, you know, maybe not in this series in particular, but for the most part, I trust Flakked. It's really about Carlson, Camelou, and Stend and whether or not they can be good enough to get this team above number 8. Like I said, this isn't a win that really proves a ton to me because I think everybody should be beating Rogue, but at the end of the day, they won, which is all that really matters, and they lost to Rogue in the winter split, so this is kind of revenge for them. And then for Rogue on the other side, Adam is really good, and that should be the takeaway for Rogue, is that Malrang, Larson, Patrick, and Execute are so bad, and they are so inactive on the map that Adam having a completely dominant performance on the Aurora in game number 1 is completely under the radar because the rest of this team can't do anything. So credit to Adam. This guy absolutely deserves to be considered a top 3 top laner right now in the LEC. The rest of this team is garbage, and it's all of them. Execute's going to get dud of the series here, but Patrick got, what, 8 dud of the series or something like that? 8 dud of the games in their 9 games over the course of the last split, something horrific. I think it was 7 of their 8 losses. I could be wrong about that. You know, someone can fact check me on that, but Patrick was like the least valuable player in LEC history in winter, and now it's his support who's actively running him down. Patrick was honestly fine. Like, he is kind of an NPC, especially on the Corki in game number 2 where he wasn't really doing anything, but the Ashe was pretty good in game number 1, all things considered. Execute was just always in the wrong place at the wrong time, going in without the help of the rest of his team. Not only was he off in game, he was off out of game, as we've seen with him trying to drink his little drink and spilling it all over himself in the middle of the game. Unreal stuff. Execute just did not have a very good day, and quite frankly, he was awful last year too for Sandbox. This has not been a good player ever since he left Astralis a couple of years ago. Larson is truly not doing anything in the middle of the map. Like, it is worst case scenario. This dude has completely mentally checked out or something. I don't know if it's just the way that the game is now or whether or not he just doesn't want to try and play to do anything in the mid game, but he is just not moving out of lane. He's picking Talia and playing it stationary in the mid lane. Like, there's just no excuse. Malrang was completely out jungled by Sheo, and like I said, Adam was was really good, but what is there to do for top lane here? Rogue is just not a great team. There's a real shot that they are the worst in the LEC. I think that that's a pretty reasonable thing to think at this point, even with Adam as a good player. If they can't pick up wins over Team Heretics with their top laner popping off, then, like, how do you even win games as Rogue at this point? And then for Heretics on the other side, we just need to see the continuous growth of a lot of these younger players. If we don't see that, I think they're going to stick at number 8. Again, I'm not taking their matchup against Rogue as this giant sign that they're going to be able to carry things forward, but the fact that they did do it on stage in a best of 3 is a good sign, and I'm hopeful they can keep it going moving forward. But then moving on to series number 3, our final series of day number 1, and man, was I looking forward to this one. It was G2 Esports taking on Movistar KOI, and G2 is going to pick up the 2-1 series win, our first series of the new split to go all 3 games, to go the full Fearless here, and G2 is going to be able to pick up the win in game number 3 off the back of a Dr. Mundo jungle. I would be more surprised by this if we hadn't seen it already in the NACL. Shout out the NACL, but Dr. Mundo jungle is strong. We've actually seen it work pretty consistently every time it's been picked, not only this year, but last year as well. There's really not an easy stop to it if you pick it late in the draft phase, and that's exactly what G2 did to be able to take advantage of, you know, the Caitlyn in the bot lane, to be able to take advantage of the fact that you have a lot of setup for fights later on in the game with Nico ultimate, obviously, but also Victor and Gnar. Like, you have plenty of ways to enable this Dr. Mundo to just create havoc and create chaos across the map, and that's exactly what they did. But that would be, I think, putting G2 in a box, and that's not necessarily what I want to do for them in this series. KOI was pretty solid, especially in that game number 2, where it felt like Alvaro was on fire, where Mirwin was incredible on the Mbessa. Like, KOI definitely showed up here today, but G2 was a little bit better, and we'll talk about that here. A lot of people are going to give player of the series to Skewmond. Trust me, I want to give it to Skewmond, and I know it kind of comes across like I'm a Skewmond hater on this channel. I really am trying not to be, but Skewmond was player of the game for game number 3. I don't think he was player of the series, if that makes sense. Player of the series for me kind of has to go to Broken Blade in the top lane, because man, was he really, really good across both of their wins. Not only was he obviously player of the game in game number 1, in my opinion, although Caps was also really good on the Yone, he was really important in game 3 on the Gnar as well. Like, if you're sitting there and saying, like, oh, it was just a Dr. Mundo game, I think that that definitely takes away some of the positives that Broken Blade ended up having. To me, he was the most relevant player as a whole across this series, but again, if you wanted to give this to Skewmond in the jungle, I'm really not going to be upset at all. He was the most important player in the closeout game, and so that can definitely kind of, you know, be the avenue you want to take if you wanted to take it. I know I get the reputation of being a bit of a Skewmond hater because I put him pretty low. I think number 4 in terms of my jungle rankings coming into this split. He definitely outplayed my number 3 jungler in Elyoya in this series. There is a real chance that he is just a top 2, top 3 guy, as I said in that video where, you know, oh, I need to see it. I'm taking a wait and see approach. I was not, you know, saying, oh, he doesn't have it, right? He definitely has it. I just need to see it on tape. This is what I needed to see. I'm really happy for Skewmond. Hansama, another player, probably the player who got the most attention in my primer video because I put him as the number 4 AD carry in Europe right now. I'm sorry, I'm just not that big of a fan of Hansama outside the confines of G2. He is a very regular AD carry, like in terms of what he actually does. He's a B+ guy. Like, he is not an A-graded AD carry. There are moments where he looks incredibly good, especially when he's not receiving resources either for him or against him, when he can just be left alone. In the 2v2, that's really where he thrives individually as a player, but I think in big moments, we've seen him sometimes not be perfect, and I think there are AD carries with higher upsides than Hansama. That being said, he's still a good player. Like, AD carry is the best role in Europe right now, and I don't even think it's all that close. Hansama is a borderline top 2, top 1 guy. He's just, in my opinion, a little bit lower than someone like Supa on the other side, although, again, he was better than Supa in this series, so wherever you want to put him, up to you. Labrov continues to play super aggro in the mid game, and sometimes can't really get away with it. He was mega outplayed by Alvaro in game number 2, but outside of that, it was pretty solid, and like I said, Caps was excellent, especially in game number 1. The Ahri was not good in game number 2 either, but you know, Caps is Caps. Like, he's going to be able to figure it out. He's got a ridiculously good winning percentage against Jojo Pune historically. So for G2, this is a really encouraging win, not just because, oh, you stepped up against a good team and actually were able to take them down, but because Broken Blade looked excellent and Mirwin was on his game today. Skewmond was able to outjungle Elyoya, and Hansama was a really good secondary carry in terms of the damage he was able to output across this series. Those are the things I needed to see in order to believe that G2 was still arguably the number 1 team in the region, and that's exactly what they gave us. And then for KOI on the other other side, I just think that this team is unfortunately a tier below the top 3 teams. I don't think they're nearly as consistent, and quite frankly, I don't think they have the upside. I think that there are players here that just do not gel, and I think their overall package is not great. Quite frankly, I compare them a lot to Cloud9 over in North America. I think they're very similar, maybe not in terms of playstyle, but in terms of where they end up ranking amongst their peers. Dud of the series here pretty much has to go to Elyoya, completely out-jungled, no real other way to say it. Like, Sejuani was okay, but the Skarner in game 1 was not good enough, and he had no answer to the Dr. Mundo jungle in game number 3, even if it wasn't entirely his fault. The Zyra did not look good, and quite frankly, Elyoya has not looked good in 2025. He's coasting off of his reputation right now, but he has no synergy at all with Jojo Pune. I would say they have anti-jungle mid synergy, which is not ideal, and him and Alvaro, while they do play off of each other well from ahead, they don't do anything together when they're behind. They don't even try to make plays together when they're behind. It's weird, so I'm not a big fan of where Elyoya is at. Again, I think you could say the same thing about Jojo Pune, who once again just doesn't look like a superstar mid laner. He looks like an average mid laner at this level, and I know the good games are good, but the bad games are just not great. It almost looks like he's scared at this point to try and make these super aggressive plays. Whatever the reason is, like, the production has not been there, and this mid-jungle duo has really let this team down. Alvaro was excellent, Mirwin was excellent, Supa was fine, generally speaking. Hans was definitely better on the other side, but Supa wasn't the problem here. This was a jungle mid gap, at least in my opinion, or a big jungle gap, and then Broken Blade being awesome on the top side, and that's really, again, where I think KOI has been let down all year long. Hopefully they can figure it out, but right now they are the clear-cut number 4 team, worse than the good ones, better than the bad ones. And for G2, this team is on the quest to get their crown back. Like, they lost it in the winter split to Corp. They don't want to be crownless for long. They want to be champions again. They want to get back to number 1, not only in the power rankings, but at the top of the standings. They want to go to MSI, and they want to prove they can compete internationally. That's why they made the changes they did in the offseason. I think they're on good track to do that, but there still is a lot to see from this team. But now moving on to day number 2, our middle day here of week number 1, and kicking off day 2 was a matchup between Team Vitality and GIANTX. That Vitality is going to pick up a 2-0 win in. You need to be able to win these series if you are one of what I would consider to be the middle of the pack teams, like the B tier teams in the LEC right now. If you're Vitality, if you're GIANTX, if you're BDS, if you're Heretics, if you're these teams that are kind of competing to, you know, be top 5 or top 6, you need to be able to win these types of games against teams that are going to be competing against you, and that's what Vitality did here. They looked really good. They were definitely the better of these two teams, and once again, I think it's their young players, or at least their, you know, pseudo-rookies that are looking really good and kind of carrying them in a lot of aspects. I think Niski looked pretty solid in his debut. A couple of problems in game number 1 on the Alistar, just kind of getting interrupted pretty constantly by Jackies on the Talia, but for the most part, this was just a good series, and they were definitely the better team here. And for GIANTX on the other side, some good and mostly some bad. This bot lane is really good, and Noah and Jun, I think, on a different team could be in a really good spot. They are the reason I was excited about GIANTX. The problem is the top side of this map is not good at all, and quite frankly, it might be one of the worst in the entire league, and that includes a team like SK or a team like Rogue, because Lot and Isma are just not clicking in terms of how this team is playing right now. We'll talk about that a bit more when we get to them, but let's start with Vitality. Player of the series for me is going to go to Chayek in the mid lane. That Ryze game, dude, in game number 2. Like, he is getting it almost entirely for Ryze in game number 2. I really wanted to give player of the series to Knock on the top side because he was really fun to watch. Not only was the Gnar a gigantic issue in game number 1 for GX, they didn't really have a good answer for him. His mechanical ceiling is ridiculously high, but that Yasuo was so dominant 1v1 in lane against Lot on the other side of this matchup. He obliterated the top lane matchup. He just didn't really do much outside of that in game number 2. He was okay in the side lane, but he wasn't, like, super impactful towards winning a lot of team fights for the team. The Ryze was, oh my god, Chayek ends up spamming taunt at GX, which enrages them so much that they try to engage on him. He just Zhonya's and they lose the game instantly. It's absolutely absurd to see the mental dominance that Chayek held over GX in this series, and, you know, he deserves it. Like, Chayek has been a player that's really impressed me so far. Both him and Knock I think have been good. I was kind of hyping up Knock going into the split, saying that he was the one player that I was really looking out for to potentially break out. For Vitality, I wasn't mentioning Chayek in that regard. I kind of saw him as more of a mage player, somebody who's going to fit in really well as like a middle of the standings type of mid laner that was going to be good for good teams, but wasn't ever going to have like an MVP caliber performance or anything like that. This was incredible. I could be entirely wrong on that take if he's going to play more like this. Again, the Azir was okay in game number 1. He wasn't dominating that game or anything, but the Ryze definitely deserves player of the series for game number 2. Knock of course, has to get that shout out. Man, was he better than Lot on the top side, who had a miserable week number 1, but Knock looking really good to start off his spring split. Again, if these solo laners can really step up and be primary options for Vitality, that completely changes the outlook of this team. Carzzy and Niski looked solid as a duo. Niski was aggressive as a playmaker. He definitely was trying things. Sometimes wasn't perfect in terms of his execution, especially on the Alistar in game number 1. But for the most part, you know, what you expect from the first game out of a player role swapping to support. Carzzy was good as a follow-up threat. He wasn't one of the primary options, nor was he in the winter split. Really, he has not been like the number 1 guy on this team like people would expect, but he's been good as a secondary carry. He's really settled into the kind of higher floor, lower ceiling playstyle that maybe this team kind of needs if they're going to be playing around solo lanes a bit more. And Linsauce was definitely fine. Now, Isma looks unplayable, and so that's part of it. I'm still not fully sold on Linsauce as a starting jungler, but it was okay in this series, and he definitely was better. Like, it was more than okay. The Maokai in particular in game 2 was really good. So credit to Vitality. They were by far the better of these two teams here, and that really rises them in terms of my power rankings. And then for GX, this team is just not good. They are not complete. Like, that's the way I'll put it. They are not a very well-rounded team. Jackie's at times looks good. Like, he was okay on the Taliyah in game number 1. There were definitely moments where it was like, okay, Jackie's is starting to make it back. We talked about that in their first series against Fnatic where things were looking okay. And then he plays the Aurora in game 2 and just runs it. Like, is not good at all in that game. And, you know, is constantly making mistakes and is over chasing for a lot of kills, and it doesn't look good. Like, Noah and Jun are really good, and I think Noah in particular played really well here. Jun was excellent on the Rakan and the Nico. I think Jun might be the best player on this team by a pretty considerable margin. I still think that they're a top 2 or 3 bot lane in the LEC. They're just trapped on a team with Lot and Isma, who cannot play right now at this level. Isma's gonna get dead of the series. It was really bad from him. This guy has not really had any success. He was obviously a part of that Movistar team that, you know, ended up becoming Mad Lions at the time. He was their jungler, and, you know, he comes up to SK, and that team obviously doesn't find any success, but he's, like, decently interesting as a player who's pretty good in the early game, especially around level 3 or level 4, where he does make a lot of really interesting plays, and then it's just kind of gotten worse from there. I think he was okay in the winter split for SK. He wasn't the biggest problem, but that team was obviously not particularly successful. He goes to K-Corp and, you know, plays for K-Corp Blue in their swap for Bukata, and, you know, obviously that's pretty well documented. A lot of stuff happens there. He gets picked up by GIANTX because they are in sudden need of a jungler, and now he just looks outclassed once again at the LEC level, and he's going into what I consider to be the weakest jungler in the entire league right now in Linsauce on the other side of this. So I don't feel particularly good about Isma. He looked really bad in this series, and quite frankly, if he doesn't get leads like level 4, I just don't know what he does at a decent level. He's a one-trick player, and that's a really frustrating thing to see here for GX, because I really did think he could be more in a different situation outside of SK, but that does not look like it's going to be the case. And then Lot is also just completely outclassed on the top side here. He got obliterated in game 2. Not that he was much better in game number 1, but holy crap, was that laning phase an absolute disaster for Lot. He is looking like one of, if not the worst player in the LEC right now to start off winter. Genuinely unplayable so far on the top side. He's going to have to be better, but I feel bad for Noah and Jun because they continue to play well. Even Jackie's, like 50% of this series was good from Jackie's. He just made some critical errors down the stretch, but for GX, that's not combining to a good result. That's not combining to be a good team. This is a very limited team with a very one-dimensional playstyle. Either bot lane is able to carry you or they're not, and that's going to be hard to do in a league with a lot of good bot lanes. And for Vitality, they were just better elsewhere. Like, their solo lanes were just better. Top lane was just better. Jungle was just better, and that's kind of what put them forward. Everybody's talking about Carzzy and Niski as kind of the, you know, main characters of this team because they're the veterans on this team, but Shayak and Naknako are definitely going to determine how far this team can go, and at least for now, that is a very good sign. Then moving on to our second series of day number 2 here, and it's finally time for the defending champions to show up here in the spring split. It was Movistar KOI taking on K-Corp, and K-Corp is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. KOI has to face the 2 defending finalists as their first 2 series of the year. They take them both to 3 games, but they cannot quite overcome the 3rd game curse. They had it in the palm of their hand in game number 3. They should have walked out of this series with a gigantic win, but they can't quite confirm it. Alvaro just goes a little bit too deep to catch out the Elise, and it ends up being to their detriment, to their downfall, and they're not able to recover. One mistake ends up costing them everything, and K-Corp ends up surviving and walking away with the 2-1 win. Obviously, you would have loved to see them come out here and absolutely decimate KOI. That would have probably made me feel a bit better, but still, being able to win these games is a very positive thing. There are some positive takeaways here for K-Corp that I'm definitely interested in talking about, so let's go ahead and get into it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Kana in the top lane. It felt like he was definitely the most consistent across both of their wins, both on the Gnar and on the Jace. Not only did he have a ton of pressure put into him in game number 3 by the enemy team, like Elyoya was holding Mirwin's hand throughout the entirety of that game, trying to get the Gragas into a position where he could help out in the later half, but Kana still came out on top. He still was able to win the 1v1. He still was able to get a ton of resources and do a ton of damage in the later half of the game. You can't give this guy Jace. I'm sorry. It's got to be a permaban against K-Corp. He is too good at the champion. He has proven it over and over and over again this year. He's been the best top laner in the LEC, and I think that carried through. He was awesome. I'm glad to kind of be a Kana Glazer at this point because the dude is just so fun to watch, and I'm really hopeful that he's going to be able to keep this up throughout the entirety of the year because this is MVP caliber stuff coming in from Kana. I also want to point out Yike, and I get that the Yike scoreline doesn't look all that good, mostly because the Sejuani game in Game 2 was awful. Like, I mean, truly, this was a two-faced type of performance on Game 1, Game 3 versus Game 2. Like, the Lilia, the Ivern, both of those games were absolutely spectacular from Yike, and he completely threw away that second game. He is probably the biggest reason why they lost in Game number 2, and so I can't necessarily, give him too much credit. I can't give him player of the series, but honestly, if he didn't have that Game 2, if he was just kind of okay and the team lost in Game number 2, he probably would have gotten player of the series for Lilia in Game number 1, where he took over, where he was dominant, and then the Ivern, where he was awesome in Game number 3 as well. I do want to give Yike credit, but man, that feast or famine style that he had at first stand is very much carried back over here domestically. We'll see if that's a best of 3 trend from him, because that could really be the case, but for now, it's definitely something you want to monitor. Vladi was really good and very consistent throughout this series. Again, he's kind of the consistent piece. Maybe he was a little bit overeager in Game number 1, things like the Silas and, the Akali, like they're very aggressive picks. Maybe he wasn't necessarily respecting Jojo Pume in the same kind of way. He did get a bit burned by that at times, but he was definitely probably the most consistent piece. Kalista is also kind of the consistent piece. Targamas looked awesome on the Alistair in Game number 1. In fact, he was probably the player of the game for Game number 1, but wasn't great in Game 2, and man, GG support diff in Game number 3. Like, don't play Elise. Like, I don't care who you are, especially in a game that you need to win or you lose the series, like a do or die Game number 3 in a best of 3. Don't pick Elise. I'm sorry, this champion doesn't do anything. I get that you can play her if you're dominant, but you have to be sure that you are the better team by a large margin in order for that champ to be useful. This was a 4v5 that K-Corp won anyways, so credit to Targa. He was good in Game number 1, but overall for K-Corp, I ended up landing on Kana, kind of being player of the series, because as you can see, there really weren't a lot of consistently great players. Yike looked awesome when he looked great. Targamas looked awesome when he looked great, but when they looked bad, they looked bad, and so K-Corp just needs to be able to shore up that inconsistency. And then for KOI on the other side, man, it's gotta feel frustrating to throw away the game like you did. I'm not blaming Alvaro entirely for going on the Elise. I understand why, see kill, go for kill, but man, did it really cost them the game, and man, did it cost them what would have been a gigantic victory for them. And, you have to feel for them in that regard, because I think Jojo actually did play well in this series. This probably is his best series in quite a long time for this team. Supa was obviously pretty solid, if not a little bit over-eager, but he was unbelievably good on the Kai'Sa in Game number 2. Like, that might have been the single best game anyone played throughout this entire series. It was a really good look for him. Unfortunately, the top side of the map was a little bit of a letdown for KC. Elyoya spends a ton of time trying to babysit Mirwin in Game number 3 on the Gragas, and yet still he's gonna get dud of the series. He was awful in terms of trying to do anything with the lead that he was able to generate. It just was super disappointing to watch a guy basically get babysat for the entirety of laning phase and still be down resources. Like, I don't really know how that's entirely possible. I get the Annie in Game number 1. This is like a long-term throwback counterpick to Gnar, many, many years ago when we were seeing, Xiaohu in the top lane pull this out. But, the Gragas game in particular is what he's getting dead of the series for. And it's just as I was jumping on the Mirwin train that he gets mega gapped by Kana. Again, getting gapped by Kana is not a unique trait right now in the LEC. Basically, everybody has been mega gapped by Kana at some point, but definitely disappointing. And Elyoya continues to make bad decisions and bad calls in the mid to late game that really throw things away for KOI. This team has no macro. They are all hands. They feel like the gatekeepers. I'm definitely going to keep saying that. They are the 4th best team. They are not in the top 3. They are definitely worse than them. They are definitely better than the bottom 6. Like, they are clearly the number 4 team in the LEC, and I think that's where they're going to land, despite everything. And then for K-Corp, they're going to be happy to walk out of this with a win, but again, still some things they need to clean up. It felt like they came into this series with the expectation that they would roll over KOI after making the finals of First Stand, but you have to remember that wasn't a particularly successful tournament for anyone except for Hanwha Life. Like, I can't really feel better about any of the teams coming out of First Stand except for HLE, and so for K-Corp, there still is a lot to prove that they need to be considered the best team in the LEC. They did a lot to prove it here today, but definitely want to see what they do next week. But that's going to bring us to our third and final day of action here in week number 1, and we kicked off day 3 with a matchup between Team BDS and Rogue that BDS is going to pick up the 2-1 series win in. This probably should not have been a game 1 loss for them, although they definitely deserved it with the way that they played. Rogue actually really stepped up and played well in that first game, and quite frankly, Rogue played fine throughout a majority of this series, even going into game number 3. There was a lot to like about what Rogue was doing, but it was basically the opposite of what they have been throughout the entirety of this year up until this point, where Adam has been trying his best on the top side and the rest of the team has been unplayable. This time, Larson actually plays super well, looks really good on the Orianna in game 1, really good on the LeBlanc in game 3. Patrick has an incredible game 1 on the Ezreal, and you're like, oh man, like the players that have really been letting this team down are stepping up, and they're going to be able to pick up a massive win here, but it's time for Adam to run it down. It's some sort of voodoo curse that means that those players cannot be playing well at the same time. Either Adam or Patrick or Larson has to play bad at some point. Like, they can't all be good at one moment, and it's really disappointing. For BDS, I think they're going to be happy to walk out of here with a win because I don't think they were perfect in this one, but I do think there's going to be more negative comments because it was against Rogue. I think if they had done this exact same series against Vitality or against GX, I think we'd be looking at them a lot more positively. I don't even think they really made all that many mistakes. I actually just think Larson and Patrick were really good in this series and did try their best to be able to push Rogue forward, but BDS was too much. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is pretty obviously going to go to 113 in the jungle. I'm really happy they're starting to play into his strengths actually again. We know he can play tanks at least a little bit because of his time on Astralis, and even going back last year on Corp, like there were moments where he was a good tank player, but this is not like a primary tank player type of guy. Like, put him on Nidalee, put him on Xin Zhao, put him on these skirmishers and allow him to take over in the mid game. That's what he does at a really high level, and that's what he did here. I've been a fan of 113 throughout basically the entirety of 2025. You know, I talked about his tape in 2024 being arguably just as good as Skumond's. I don't think it's quite as versatile. Again, Skumond is a player that I think is way better at tanks than 113 is. I think 113 is about as good on carries as Skumond is. Maybe a little bit better, but not a ton. And, like, obviously he's not on the same level in terms of, like, all the other champions. But 113 is a very, very good carry and a very good primary option. He was way better in 2024 than anybody gave him credit for because he wasn't good when he was playing in the LEC last time for Astralis. I was expecting a pretty decent year out of him. It's taken him some time to get going, but he's gotten better and better game over game. He was not great in week 1 in Winter, and, you know, first impressions last a lot, but he was pretty good down the stretch in Winter when this team kind of needed him, and now he's looking good again. So, again, hopefully he's playing more carries, and hopefully he's going to be able to actually start taking over games once again in the mid game. I do want to give another big shout out to Ice, who was pretty solid here. He was a player that wasn't all that great in the Winter split. He kind of lost touch of, I think, what he was really good at last year, which is hyper carry stuff, you know, playing things like Zeri, playing things like Xayah, playing things like Jinx every game. That's what Ice was doing. That's what BDS's win condition was for the most part. That's obviously not what's going to work for them on this new map and with this new construction of the team without a player like Labrov to be able to enable that as consistently without someone like Shea, who's also much more of a team fighter than a mid-game skirmisher. It just doesn't work as well for Ice right now to play that style, but I was really impressed with the Jhin in game number 3. I was pretty impressed with the Varus in game number 1. Does feel like Ice is starting to get back to comfort, which I think is a good thing overall, and again, hopefully he's just going to be a lot better moving forward because he needs to be better than whatever he was in the Winter split. Nuke is awesome. I've hyped him up so much. He's a top 3 mid laner in the LEC. He kind of proved that here. Even with Larson playing really well on the other side, Nuke was not the problem for BDS. The only issues here, Irrelevant wasn't perfect. Like, there were times, he was definitely the better top laner. I want to make that clear. He was the better of these two top laners, but I think that there are still a lot of individual concerns with how he plays a lot of his team fights that are really starting to, you know, kind of be like real issues for him and not just, oh, I hope he overcomes this. It's like, oh, is this just who he's going to be moving forward for BDS? That's going to be a wait and see approach. And Paris caught out a lot, especially on the Karmine game number 3. Now, you know, for the most part, that ended up actually being kind of a positive overall for BDS because Rogue, you know, trades killing Paris for the game, which is a disaster. But, you know, Paris still was getting caught out, which is definitely something worth noting. But 113, Nuke and Ice played really well. And especially if 113 is going to be a positive for this team, there is a clear path for them being a lot better than what they were in Winter. But for Rogue, on the other side, there's just no clear path for them. There is no way that I can imagine a world where they're actually going to be able to be anything other than one of, if not the worst team in the LEC. Even though they picked up a victory here, even though there were players that played above their station across this series, like the overall package that Rogue offers is so lacking in terms of consistency that there's just no way I can ever imagine they're going to be able to put it together. Dud of the series is very obviously going to go to Adam in the top lane. Now, I am the biggest Adam defender defender, I think, of anybody in the community, of any analyst right now, and I'm still going to be an Adam defender. I've never claimed that he's consistent. I've certainly never claimed that he doesn't have bad games. There's a reason he was off BDS at the end of last year, because he was really bad for them in their playoff runs. Like, in the games that really mattered at the end of last year, he did not step up. He was not good enough, and he does have the Rift issues, obviously, that are very well documented, but this is a player that can run it down, and he did exactly that, which is super unfortunate, because if he had been a remotely neutral top laner for the team this series, they'd probably win this series, which is really, really frustrating, especially after I hyped him up so much in the first series that they played earlier on in the week. But it's just how it goes. Adam ends up losing them this series, and it is what it is, but credit to Larson, credit to Patrick, who I think really stepped up a lot. Larson was definitely the best player on Rogue across this series, in my opinion. The Orianna in Game 1 was good. The LeBlanc in Game 3 was excellent. Like, he was super far ahead, and he was in a good spot to actually be able to win that game. He just didn't. Obviously, he was a little bit more passive than maybe you would want at the end of Game 3, but really, at the end of the day, what do you want him to do? This team made horrible macro decisions. Patrick was unreal good in Game number 1 on the Ezreal. This looked like prime Patrick. Like, this is the guy that we were calling the best AD carry in Europe a couple of years ago, many years ago, I guess at this point, back in like 2020, 2021. Like, this is the guy that, you know, we had so highly rated that we thought could really be a champion in the LEC at one point. That's what Game 1 Patrick was, and then he kind of went back to being Patrick, especially in Game 2 on the Corki, but at least we know it's still in there. Like, you can still get that out in the best possible scenario. There was no glimpse of that in Winter, so at least there was a glimpse of that here, but there's still a lot of problems with this team. Execute had a really bad week overall in terms of actually being a playmaker for this team. Malrang is just a complete non-factor in the jungle. He is like a complete net neutral, a slightly below average jungler that's not actually really able to win in any matchups. It's not looked good for him. And then, like I said, one of Adam, Larson, and Patrick seems destined to just run it at some point across every single series that they play. And if that's going to be the case, this is going to be the worst team in the LEC. And then for BDS on the other side, 1-1-3 looks good, man. He's got to be able to keep it up, but he is such an integral turning piece for whether or not this team is going to be as successful as they want to be or not. This can be a top 5 team pretty easily in the LEC. It certainly can be a playoff team. I think they're on pace to do that right now with how good I think their mid lane has been, and with Ice stepping back up. Hopefully Irrelevant and Paris can kind of get on track, because they're kind of the last players to really come around, but BDS is really in a good spot to potentially be a top 5-ish team right now. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here, and it took us long enough to get a real and true gigantic upset in the LEC. It was Fnatic taking on SK Gaming, and of course SK Gaming is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. They're not going to drop a single game to Fnatic. They come from behind in game number 2. They dominate game number 1, and they are clearly the better of these two teams. I don't even really know how to analyze this, because there's so much going on. There's so much happening between these two teams, but Fnatic, what is this, dude? Like, I'm serious. Go back and watch the primer. I feel like I hit the nail on the head, except I overstated how good they would be in the regular season. I talked about how this jungle mid just is always going to have an inherent ceiling. Like, there is no way that they're ever going to be able to break through in the way that you want them to, and they're kind of the core of this team. Well, here's the ceiling getting punched through by SK and saying, like, yeah, on our best day, if we're playing the best games that we can play, and if Razork and Huma are just letting the team down, like, you're actually not that, like, unbeatable. Like, we are better than you in that hypothetical scenario that's no longer a hypothetical, which is so disappointing for Fnatic, but it's huge for SK. The fact that this is even possible in the first place is gigantic, considering what they were. I did not hype up the offseason changes for SK. I honestly wasn't that big of a fan of them. I liked bringing in Bukata. He was the player that I was more excited about. You know, not that I don't like him as much as I like Kadui, but I just think jungle, you know, making that change, it's relatively fair. Bukata seems like a player with good upside, and he was awesome in this series, but, you know, I was really critical of them replacing Rahel, because I thought Rahel is, you know, one of the best AD carries in the entire league, and Kadui, a player who I do really like, and I think absolutely deserves an LEC shot. I just wasn't sure that he was actually going to be better than Rahel, especially from day number 1, and while he was good in this series, it wasn't even the focal point. It was the middle of the map that dominated for SK Gaming. Player of the series for me is going to go to Reeker in the mid lane. How did this happen? Humanoid. Like, I'm going to skip over a bit of SK here. We'll get to them, I promise. if you're Humanoid, how can you possibly allow Reeker to dominate you in terms of the 1v1, in terms of being able to play the mid game, in terms of, you know, Humanoid throwing away his gigantic lead in the Baron fight at the end of game number 2? Like, what are we doing here, dude? Like, I'm so out on Humanoid, and Reeker took huge advantage of that. He is an easy choice for player of the series for me. I think broadcast and, you know, Twitter, I think, voted for Bukata because he's the new player and because, you know, he's kind of the new look player in general for SK. It kind of defines this new era of SK going into the spring split, but Reeker was the best player on the Rift in this series, and I don't even think it was all that close. I was really impressed with how he played the Jace in particular in game 1, but the Ahri in game 2 was excellent. He was awesome, and Bukata was a really good facilitator for the team as well on both the Sedge and the Vi, especially the Sejuani in game number 1, where it really felt like he did a lot. Like, Bukata looked very comfortable in his LEC debut, which you don't often see out of rookies. He was definitely better than Razork. Razork got the OP, unbelievably broken pick of the patch in Neferi in game number 1 and looked miserable on it because Bukata completely shut him down with the Sejuani. It was really, really great stuff. So if the middle of the map is going to look this good, like, what else is SK going to be able to do? Well, Loopy ends up getting a solo kill in game number 2 on the Rel into Humanoid. How is that even possible? Again, Humanoid looks like an absolute NPC at the current moment, but Kadui also looking really solid. The Corki, the Ezreal, he was really good as a primary option in terms of damage in a lot of these fights and a secondary option in terms of resource gathering in a lot of these situations. GIANTX was fine on the top side, even if he was a little bit weaker than Oscarinen. In terms of the 1v1, he wasn't hard losing. Like, GIANTX's laning is his strength, and so, SK, are you actually an interesting team? I don't want to overreact to one series win because, again, this felt more like Fnatic losing than SK winning, but at the end of the day, SK has to be good enough to be able to take advantage of the bad version of Fnatic. Not every team is going to be able to do that, and the high end of SK is clearly a lot higher than we thought it was going to be, so we'll keep monitoring them, but this might not be a bottom 2 team. Hell, in worst case scenario, who knows, they might compete for top 6. That would be insane, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. And then for Fnatic on the other side, Razork and Humanoid, like, just point and laugh. What do you even want me to say? Like, genuinely, what do you want me to say that I haven't already said on this channel? Razork gets Neferi in game number 1, which has decimated every region that it's been played in, specifically the LPL, where it's been unstoppable, and he looks miserable. It looks like he's never played the champion before. Why would you even pick it? He got completely out-jungled by a player in his first ever LEC series here. Unacceptable. It's not like the Maokai was a ton better. Humanoid is getting solo killed by Loopy. He's throwing the game away at Baron. He's awful. He's done of the series. I'm so out on Humanoid. I'm so done with him as a player. This is not a borderline top 3 mid laner anymore. This guy's a lot closer to being, like, I think of him where I think of Jojo Pune, except I've seen so much more of the negativity from Humanoid. I can't reasonably believe that you have a chance to win the LEC with Humanoid as your mid laner. I just don't believe that that's the case anymore. And Razork is starting to concern me in that same vein. When you're getting outplayed by Bukata and Reeker in a best of 3 and going down 0-2 because of it, like, there's nothing else to say. I get that they might have not been locked in. Maybe I'm overreacting to one best of 3, but man, it looked awful, and it's not the first time that we've seen this happen to these two. It happens every single year at some point. It's so frustrating. Upset and Mickey were really good in this series. They tried their best. Oscarinen was fine on the top side. They were not the issue. The middle of the map lost this series for Fnatic, and they have to take a look in the mirror. These are the players that they've run back over and over and over again, and I'm going to repeat basically exactly what I said in my primer video. This is the core of the team, and this is the era of the team where you have been unable to win a championship. There is a correlation. Razork and Huma are not going to be the players that get you over that hump. I think this just confirms that for me. And then for SK on the other side, what a fantastic win. Again, I don't want to make too many, like, big assertions because this is a big win, but, you know, if Reeker can keep this up, if having Bukata in here just makes him feel more comfortable, or if Kadui is going to actually be like a top 4, top 5 AD carry in the league, which I guess is possible, he's good enough to be able to do that, SK could be a lot more interesting than we thought. Maybe they could even compete for top 6 if they play like this the entire split. Now, it's one best of 3. Again, I'm not going to overreact, but there's a lot of good things to take away from this for them. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LEC week number 1 overview and analysis video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Up on the screen now, the updated standings after 1 week of action. You can see some of the obvious ties that we have here because not a lot of games have been played yet. All ties are just broken alphabetically, but of course, it's first sorted by actual game records, so 1-0s are not all created equally. It's why SK, Heretics, and Vitality are at 1, and G2 and K-Corp and BDS are all at 4 because Some of those teams won 2-0, some of those teams won 2-1, so I hope that makes sense, but everything else is just sorted alphabetically. Of course, next to every single team, you can see my personal power ranking for each team from number 1 to number 10. Change is going to be how that has changed from last week to this week, so we can go over the biggest risers and fallers. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all staying the same, and that might be controversial. Fnatic gets absolutely blasted by SK Gaming and stays at number 3 in my power rankings. I still think they're going to end up as the 3rd best team in the LEC, but the reason I was so aggressive is like these are the kinds of losses that prove to me that Fnatic cannot be number 1, right? That a team like Corp or G2 is always going to be able to outpace them when it matters the most because players like Razork and Humanoid are too exploitable. Do I think their floor is high enough for them to get 3rd? Absolutely. Do I think that they're going to be a top 1 contender? No, I really don't. So they stay at number 3, and KOI's going to stay at number 4. They still feel like the gatekeepers, but moving up to number 5 is going to be BDS, and moving up to number 6 is going to be Vitality. Those are the 2 teams right now I have on the outside, or I guess like right on the inside, the last into the playoffs, if you will. BDS just looked really good in their series. I think they have a pretty complete roster so long as Irrelevant and Paris can get on track because 113 does look like he's coming along, and then Vitality do have a lot going for them. They might be the 5th best team. There's basically no difference in grade between BDS and Vitality for me. They're basically in the exact same spot if you wanted one of them at 5 and the other at 6. I firmly believe that, but very clearly at 7 for me, it's going to be GIANTX falling a couple of spots. They looked awful in week number 1. Noah and Jun are still pretty good, and Jackie's had a couple of really good moments that give me some encouraging thoughts on this team being able to get better moving forward, but at least for now, if Lot and if Isma are going to play as poor as they did in week number 1, it's going to be difficult to imagine a world where this team is actually a playoff team. So they're on the outside looking in as of now. Then the rest of the power rankings stay the same. Heretics will stay at 8. I shouldn't say that. Rogue is going to drop to number 10. SK is going to jump up to number 9. I get that SK looked awesome in their win over Fnatic, but just because I'm not freaking out on Fnatic's behalf that they lost this, I'm not going to be freaking out on SK's behalf that they won this. Again, I think it was more on Fnatic just being awful than it was on SK being great. Prove me wrong. If they come out next week and look excellent and once again are starting to win, I'm going to consider them a potential top 6 team, a team that's better than Heretics and GIANTX and teams in that area. I think that that's doable for SK. They're certainly much more within striking distance of that now than they were before, and Rogue is pretty clearly the worst team in the LEC right now, so I feel pretty confident putting them at number 10. But let me know what you agree with or disagree with in terms of those power rankings down below. I'm sure you disagree on something. Let me know what it is down there, but let's go ahead and move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 1. Player of the week for me is going to go to Chayek, the mid laner for Vitality. I honestly don't think there were a ton of great choices this week. Not that there were bad games played, but just I don't think anybody stood out as being like overtly dominant, much more so than everybody else involved. Chayek was definitely the most consistent across his 2 games, and I think his Rise game was certainly extremely good, and so for me, he does get the slight edge, although my runner-ups are closer to player of the week than they normally are. I'm giving it to Chayek, but if you wanted to give it to 113, the jungler for BDS, or Broken Blade, the top laner for G2, I think that that's fair. I really deliberated between Chayek and 113 for player of the week. I think it absolutely could be either of them. They basically have the same case to be made, but Chayek went undefeated, whereas, 113 lost that game number 1, so I am favoring Chayek in that regard, but 113 was also really excellent in his series. And then dud of the week for me, again, pretty obvious. It's going to go to Lot, the top laner for GX. There was no question. He was the worst player in the league this week. The only player that even gave him a run for his money was his teammate, Isma, who I was also considering for this. Nobody else was really even in the vicinity in terms of my thoughts. I guess theoretically you could look at someone like Elyoya for this negativity award as well, but Lot was definitely the worst performing player. If he's going to be as bad as he was on the top side, both weak side and strong side, like GX is not going to be a playoff team. He's actively going to be keeping them out of that spot, even with as good as their bot lane is. So he needs to be better. Dud of the week is going to go to Lot, and player of the week is going to go to Chayek, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We'll be covering every single LEC game on this channel, as we always do. And of course, we cover all of the other major regions as well. That's the LTA North, that's the LCK, that's the LPL, and the NACL Tier 2 over in North America. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.